Hi, I'm Oliver. This is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Today I'm going to do a top 5 albums to get you into ambient. Ambient's definitely a genre that I feel is much more conditional by nature. You need to be in the right environment and frame of mind to properly experience the subtle soundscapes that you're listening to. It tends to be moments of isolation and moments where it's not a very communal type of music, I don't think. I often listen when I'm running or on a solitary walk. That way there's no distractions and I can just properly get sucked into the music. It's a style of music that doesn't often reveal itself on a first listen, but after subsequent listens really starts speaking to you and you start to understand what's going on. It's so different to the immediacy of most forms of music, but there's nothing quite when you've listened to a piece of music a number of times finally getting it. My list today contains a few classics of the ambient genre, but also some contemporary albums that for me really sit at the peak of ambient work today. Number 1, Brian Eno's Music for Airports, 1978. One of the first true pioneers of the ambient genre, although not the first. Brian Eno really popularised ambient music in the mainstream media through his Ambient series, starting with Music for Airports. As a quick side note, I definitely recommend you listening to all of his ambient works, or to be honest, everything Eno's ever done. He's just brilliant. But listen to all the ambient works. My personal favourite's Ambient 2, Plateau for Mirror, which was the ambient follow-up to Music for Airports. But if you're going in fresh, you may as well start where it all began, with Music for Airports. I've definitely said Music for Airports too many times. His idea with this project was to create a piece of music that you could listen to on a loop and both ignore and listen to intently, depending on where your frame of mind was. And the idea that the music on a continuous loop would dissipate the tense, haughty atmosphere of somewhere like an airport. I suppose this is the true beginning of music being created to facilitate a calm, reflective response in the listener. A kind of atmosphere that would allow the person to think and reflect and let the music wash over them. To create this album, Eno created tracks of different instruments, so acoustic piano, acoustic guitar, wordless vocals, and then he put them on a loop, but the loops didn't match up. It would be a mathematical impossibility to ever truly sync back up again, which is quite nice because it's almost like a sonic interpretation of an airport where you have planes flying off to different places in an airport and never syncing up again. Their flight paths never really sync. The result of this experiment that he did is a very ethereal collection of tracks with little piano motifs and light voices floating in and out of synthesizers. It's just willing you to shut your eyes and escape the everyday for just a little while. Take track 2, titled 2/1. It sounds like a church choir with its beautiful vocal harmonies, but without any lyrics that are anything to do with religion or God. It's like a celebration of life. The whole thing feels like this: remember where you're going, remember the places you're going, think about things. And that's what Eno was trying to achieve all along with this project. On another note, if you're looking for ambient music to study to, then this album is definitely a great place to start. Number 2, Tangerine Dream's Phaedra, released in 1974. Another hugely prolific artist along with Brian Eno, Tangerine Dream have been recording music for about 4 decades. There's so many different projects that have taken on completely different forms. You've probably unknowingly heard some of their music if you're one of the millions of people that played Grand Theft Auto 5, because they actually soundtracked that game. So if you're running a prostitute over or blowing up a gang or something, that kind of 80s synth kind of neuroticism sound with the keyboards and the low bass, that was them. They're a German electronic group and they've effectively shaped a lot of genres throughout their history. They've shaped things like krautrock, progressive, new wave, and experimentalism throughout their varied, prolific decades of work. But this album, Phaedra, is all based around this Moog synthesizer, which hadn't really been used much in commercial music up until this point. And Tangerine Dream had never used it either, so it was a real experimental time for them. Apparently it was so difficult to use, they would have to manually tune it up every single day because there was no presets at that time. So they spent most of the day doing that, and then most of the evening and into the night recording these strange soundscapes and weird noises. And I think the result of that, you can hear that it's experimental. They're trying out new things and they're not really sure where it's going. And there's even a couple of points in the tracks where you can hear the synthesizer very slightly detuning because it was getting towards the end of the day. Compared to Music for Airports, Phaedra is a much more urgent record. It's spacey and futuristic and epic. dragging you through to these deep synthy climaxes and deep layered scales of unusual sounds. This album personally for me feels like a soundtrack to discovery, which is so wildly different from the introspective quality of Music for Airports. Number 3, Aphex Twins Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, released in 1994. I was at a loss whether to include this or Aphex Twins Ambient Works Volume 1, which is altogether far more immediate, but I feel like Volume 2 definitely is more over the line of ambient and very far away from dance music or anything beat driven. So I think it's probably a better introduction in terms of ambience as a genre, but definitely check out Volume 1 as well, because that was just a real peak for experimental, electronic and dance music as well. RDJ has said in the past that every track on this album was inspired by lucid dreaming that he'd experienced and had also come about as a result of his synesthesia, which for those of you that might not know, synesthesia is a condition where the brain attributes colours to form, shapes, letters, and also sounds as well in this case. I'm not synesthetic at all, but I do feel like when you listen to this album, you can hear wildly different sonic palettes that were inspired by completely different things as you're listening through. This record isn't one flowing part like Phaedra or Music for Airports. It's like a rich tapestry of moods, fizzling in and out and changing your perceptions every few minutes. Tracks like Radiator are particularly unsettling. It consists of this haunting loop of tuned percussion. It's very slightly detuned actually, and it just keeps going on and on. It's eventually joined by another melody of percussion. As you get further through the track, we get this distorted burst, which almost sounds like the tuning of a radio or something, or high-pitched treated screaming. It's just got this horrible menace to it. It's a really unsettling track. But then that track is followed by Rhubarb, which is one of the most beautifully serene, minimalistic pieces I've ever listened to. Its simplicity is several notes repeated across these soft electronics and string instruments which create a blissfully calm atmosphere. A personal favourite of mine is Blue Calcs, a gentle but complex track which has this fragile, pulsating rhythm throughout it, really good for cathartic running experiences. Number 4, Stars of the Lid and their Refinement of the Decline, released in 2007. These guys are an ambient drone duo hailing from Texas that have been experimenting with sonic landscapes and visual paint. Oh, well that's kind of shit. And we're back. The lights all just went out then. Don't know why. They've been experimenting with sonic landscapes and sound painting since 1995. As another side note, when I'm talking about drone, I'm referring to this style of music composition which is using a tone or a cluster of tones which repeat for a sustained period and are maybe slightly varied. Drone has become part of ambient contemporary music as much as it's its own genre as well, and a method of music writing as well. This album's much more orchestral than the other albums I've picked, featuring violin, trumpets, clarinets, harp, among modern electronic equipment. I would say the choice of orchestral instrumentation makes for a far more somber listening experience. It feels very serious. I guess it's got a cinematic quality to it because we attribute soundscapes in films to often be orchestral. So it has like a real cinematic quality to it. But for me, it's quite heavy to listen to. What's so fascinating about this kind of music is it's completely open to interpretation, and it really depends on that specific listener's responses or the mood that they're in at the time. What I might find uplifting and light, you might find crushingly sad and depressing. On Articulated Silences Part 2, all of a sudden the track melts into this new melody, which is, for me, it's on this entirely different emotional level, and it really hits me hard. You have all of a sudden this real deep bass and all of the violins follow in suit as well, and it just really hits me right there. And it really shows that the smallest change in this kind of music can elicit the biggest response, because you're used to this similar flow of music, or you're used to a specific sound, and then all of a sudden when that's very slightly varied, it just opens up this whole new world of emotions and feelings. Number 5, Tim Hecker, Rave Death 1972, released in 2011. Tim Hecker has been a hugely influential artist in the past decade. He's collaborated with people like Ben Frost, who's another ambient drone artist. He's worked with Daniel Lopatin from Oniotrix Point Never. He's done sound installations across the country and across the world. He's been releasing project after project, which are always brilliant. There's a similarity to And Their Refinement of the Decline and Rave Death 1972 in that both artists have prolifically used drone throughout the tracks, but that's probably about where the similarities end. The cover depicts MIT students pushing a baby grand off of a roof, which completely taps into a lot of Hecker's ideas on this album. He had this real interest in the idea of the degradation of music and the decay of music, and that definitely comes across visually on his album art as much as it does sonically in the pieces that he's written for it. Hecker recorded this album in a church in Reykjavik in Iceland using mainly pipe organ and acoustic piano, and you can really feel the icy, cold, isolated sound coming through on those recordings. Tracks like In the Fog 2 loop the pipe organ over and over again before dissipating into this glitchy, overdriven guitar sound which begins to decay the entire track. It starts to rip into everything until you can only hear this kind of overdriven, decayed noise, before that then disappears again and you're left with this haunting piano loop. The closing triptych of In the Air allows that tension that's really been building up to just cut out and disappear, so we're only left with very reverb heavy piano and very light lilting choir sounds. For me, this is one of the most transcendental pieces of music I've ever listened to, and I love the fact that Tim Hecker had a concept, quite a heady concept, about the decaying and the decline of music, but without having to employ some sort of narrative to convey that. It just comes through in the music, and that's such an amazing thing to have been able to achieve. It really just envelops me in its themes and its ideas. There you have it, that's my 5 albums to get you into ambient music. As before, I've included the link to a Spotify playlist that has all of the albums that I discussed on it, and there's also more albums to get you into ambient that I've also included, so if you like that, go and check out those artists on that playlist as well. Please comment down below, give me a subscribe if you like the content. If you don't agree with my 5 albums, tell me what you'd have done instead. Let's just have a chat. Thanks a lot.